Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Welcome to the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Parkin, in Berkeley, California today. And as always, I am joined by
Bob Bazanko. I'm in Houston right now, and it's good to be back. It's been a few weeks, so.
Yeah. And yeah, it is good to be back. We've been a little bit of hiatus for the last couple of weeks. Today we're going to be talking about an issue that's been in the news a lot, but I don't actually think we've ever covered this before. I don't think we covered border issues before, but we're going to be talking about the border. Joining us is Candice Bernd, who is a return guest to the Green and Red podcast, who's a senior editor and staff reporter at Truthout, who's also been published in The Nation, in These Times, the Texas Observers, and many other publications. Candice, welcome back to Green and Red podcast.
Hey, Scott and Bob, thanks so much for having me back.
Yep. So we're going to be talking about your recent trip and article to the border, to Eagle Pass, Texas. Just to give a little background, Texas has defied a Biden administration cease and desist order, refusing to dismantle its border barrier near the city of Eagle Pass on the Rio Grande. They have installed fencing, gates, razor wire. Biden has actually been backed up by the Supreme Court on this. And then at least 14 other states have sent National Guard units to the border to support Texas in its defiance of the Biden administration. Couple other quick notes I want to make is that in January, a mother and her two children drowned in the Rio Grande after Border Patrol agents denied access, acting under orders from Republican Governor Greg Abbott. And then just at large, the U.S.-Mexico border is the world's deadliest land route. In 2023, there were at least 686 deaths. About 140, 150 of those are actually in the area around the Texas border and parts of the New Mexico border. So it's a very contentious issue, and there's a lot going on around this. So maybe, Candice, you could start off with a little bit of the background on what's been going on in Eagle Pass just the last couple of weeks, and how and your article is a big focus on residents in Eagle Pass who are actually opposed to the immigration policies of Greg Abbott. And so maybe just give us a little bit of how that's being received by residents in Eagle Pass.
Yeah, I'd say this conflict between the Texas National Guard and Border Patrol has been going on a lot longer, I think, than most people know. It's been building in the news the past couple of weeks, but there have been Texas National Guard folks in and out of the Eagle Pass border area as a part of Operation Lone Star for months now. And so this has been a sort of slow burn conflict that is been ramping up and reaching this crescendo point, breaking through in the news most recently. But you're right. I think you capped up the most recent week's news pretty well. I think what's interesting is, in terms of the Supreme Court, even the conservative justices, right, sided with Border Patrol and obviously the federal government. It was a 5-4 decision. Really, that should be like a 9-0 decision. It's even wild that was conflicting the way it was. But what they ruled specifically was that Border Patrol can cut the razor wire, or the concertina wire, in order to gain access to Shelby Park, which is the center of the struggle here, in order to access it. But what the court didn't specifically rule on was whether or not Texas and DPS, the Department of Public Safety, and the Texas National Guard can continue to just erect more and more razor wires. So that's like this weird legal loophole that's there, where it's like the court has said they can cut to gain access. And so Abbott and Texas National Guard is just erecting more and more razor wire, but they are in defiance of, you said, the cease and desist order, which is like a separate federal order as well as I understand. But right. And so obviously Abbott reacting to that, using this language of foreign invasion, very specifically foreign invasion, in order to pull up some specific provisions of the Texas Constitution. And that's really what we have to look at here. I think most folks just understand this isn't an invasion. These people aren't coming over the border armed. They are seeking help. They are seeking asylum. And so that's what you're seeing jockeyed about and failing in the Senate, that the recent Senate bill that just got scuttled over trying to just redo our approach to asylum in general. And I think folks on the left understand the Senate bill that was just passed as, in a lot of ways, really trying to make the asylum system even harder to get through than it already is. And a lot of the reasons why folks are coming up, right? One is climate change. It's not all climate change, but obviously climate change is increasingly becoming a push factor. But another thing is our own foreign policy that has led to a lot of the violence and poverty that has pushed a lot of folks out. It's a real injustice, the way that people are looking at these folks coming up through the border in desperation as invaders, as this kind of military threat, and Trump even using words like poisoning the blood of our country. That is where we're at. It's this fascistic rhetoric, especially when it comes to migrants. And you can really see the ways in which the Democrats are complicit in this rising fascism, with the way that they have just totally compromised any sort of values when it comes to the immigration debate. In particular, Biden, in his campaign in 2020, used words like "not another foot" to talk about the border wall. And that's just totally fallen by the wayside. If anything, the Democrats are doing everything they can to try to look tougher on immigration and border issues now, because they view that as not a winning issue for them. So that's some of the background leading up to before I went myself to Eagle Pass.
Just to follow through that a bit, because I think it's important what, the point you brought out about Democrats, and here I live in Texas also, and I'm not hearing anything locally. People are running for office. We have a Senate race now, but no, all the Democrats are avoiding this issue. It seems to me that you're involved in this way more. Is there anyone in this state who's trying to do something about it, or it just seems like they've all kind of thrown up their hands, and Biden has promised to get tough, and he's doing all the stuff that he claimed he was going to stop, and it's very similar to Trump's immigration policies. Is there anyone here giving any help? Has anybody gone down and talked to the people in Eagle Pass?
Not that I'm aware of. If you look at, so Eagle Pass isn't South, the South Texas the way I'm talking about, but if you look at South Texas, there was a Republican Latina, I think her name was Mayra Flores, who flipped that county there, or that one of the seats there, and it was very unprecedented. And I think that kind of has changed the border politics, where you have a lot of Democrats who are in South Texas and border areas who are really worried about taking too left of a stance, I think, on immigration issues because of that. Yeah, I really think that the political dynamic has shifted. And this is something that I really saw in Eagle Pass directly when speaking to the residents. So the residents there really are just now getting organized. They're organizing themselves into the Eagle Pass Border Coalition is the group name. And they are getting a lot of help from folks in Laredo. Laredo is about 2 hours away or so. But the folks in Laredo in 2020, they had their own campaign. It wasn't against razor wire the way Eagle Pass is dealing with it, but they had their own campaign against the border wall. There was like 2 separate contracts for border wall along their own riverfront, like park-esque areas in Laredo, like very visually riverfront properties and parks that would have been walled off. And so they were successful in that campaign. They won and defeated those contracts. And part of that was the politics of the time it was like right in the election year. And this was around the time when Biden was saying not another foot. So they really pressured him on that. And they were like, this is the language you're using. And yeah, they were successful. And now those folks are being recruited in to help the folks in Eagle Pass get on their feet, speak. But the folks in Eagle Pass are just facing political circumstances and a political dynamic that is almost entirely the opposite of what the folks in Laredo faced when they took on their struggle against the border wall. So it's really it really captures the ways the political dynamic has completely flipped in only a short amount of time.
I want to spend a couple minutes just describing Eagle Pass, what the community there is like, how this is affecting them. It's affecting their businesses. They're dealing with this influx of some not very nice people. Like, what's that community like, and what are they, like, why are they so upset about this? What are they going to try to do?
Yeah, they feel like they are just caught in the crossfire between Abbott and the federal government and the Texas National Guard and these right-wing folks who came into town calling themselves God's Army, this trucker convoy that I'll speak to more. but they really feel like no one is paying attention to their issues and their struggle. And one of the first things that I picked up when I arrived in town and drive around is you can really see that this is a town that is facing higher poverty rates than you might see elsewhere in Texas. A lot of blighted homes in Eagle Pass. You can just tell just driving around that this is a place that really needs resources, really needs help. So what they talk about is they need money for getting a signal there just on your phone, trying to live tweet or something. I had to abandon that prospect. Bad signal. They want money for schools, infrastructure, all the things that a lot of communities are asking for, right? So one resident, Jesse Fuentes, he owns like a kayak business. It's a canoe and kayak where, you rent and you go on the Rio Grande. So basically, when the Texas National Guard came in and took over Shelby Park, they cut off his business's access to the only public boat ramp for miles and miles. It's like the next boat ramp is like 14 plus miles away. So they basically single-handedly killed his business by taking over the boat ramp to the river. And then also the buoys, the saw-style razor wire buoys have been an issue also for his business, just people trying to go on the river and migrants trying to cross and survive. But yeah, he's suing the Texas National Guard, Department of Public Safety, and the state of Texas over those issues in particular. And yeah, these folks are basically another one, America Garcia Gray. She is really vocal about the town's struggles, about how they don't want to take sides in the battle, but that they don't feel like they are being invaded by migrants. What they feel like is they're being invaded by the right-wing folks who are coming into their community as a part of this trucker convoy. And so they're really just, I think the media is really missing out on lifting those folks up in particular and paying attention to what they're saying. Despite the poverty and the issues that the town faces, it's actually a really safe community. Trump and the right always try to characterize these border communities as really unsafe places, and that's just not the case. And so just really talking about what it's actually like to live there and deal with all of this influx.
One thing I actually looked up the voting patterns of Maverick County, and it's for many decades it's 70% plus voted Democratic, and then in this last election in 2020, I was only looking at presidential ones. There was like a 20-point drop, where it used to be like 70 or 75% voting for the Democrats. It was only like 54% for Biden. And you'd alluded to this before, where there's a lot of Democrats who are very anxious in some of these border communities. What would you say in Eagle Pass is contributed to this sort of like shift? Is it some of this rhetoric that we see from this new Republican Party, or are there other things at play?
Yeah, in terms of the drop specifically for Biden, it might just be because of Biden's problems in particular.
I'm talking, these were in 2020 though, not more
Okay.
recently.
Okay, I see. Yeah. Yeah, I think again, it's just part of this overall shift that's happening politically that we're seeing. But I still think that it's a struggle for them to know who really has their backs with the way that Democrats' rhetoric is so rapidly shifting. It is hard increasingly for people who live on the border to know who to turn to, who's actually going to help in any sort of realistic sense. And that is a problem that is only getting increasingly harder. I know that for folks in Eagle Pass, the residents most recently, so after my story came out, they released an open letter specifically targeted to Abbott, just talking about what he did with his press conference, inviting the 14 governors, where he did the press conference in Shelby Park. That was not this past Sunday, but the one before, and specifically framed it as, hey, you're putting a crosshair on our community and you are revving up like political violence to come into our community. And that's what we have been basically seeing. It's they don't know who to trust in terms of on the Democratic side, and on the Republican side, they're literally having to stave off telling politicians like Abbott, hey, literally don't come and target our community for violence with your rhetoric. And that is a really serious issue. In addition to the convoy coming in, which there were several myriad connections to militias involved in the convoy. They really tried to play up this official rhetoric around, we are not forming a militia. It's not like that. But if you really look, there are obviously many connections to militias. There's militias in Nebraska, California, and at least one member of the 3%ers who asked if he could join. There was a member. So the convoy, if you'll recall, when there was a Canadian trucker convoy opposed to COVID. So that's the lineage out of which this thing comes.
We did a show on that 2 years ago.
Okay, so it's that, right? So if you'll recall, that happens. And then there's a little like American one that forms, I believe in 2022, and they go to Washington, D.C. So this convoy to the border is like coming out of that lineage, but it's also connected, the organizers to it. One of them is Kim Yater. She's connected with this Reawaken megachurch. And that church has hosted Mike Flynn's Reawaken America tour. And it's this fusion of Christian revivalism and conspiracies, like far-right conspiracy stuff. And so that's really what this thing is. Were a bunch of folks who were armed. They didn't have their long guns showing up at the rally with them, but they certainly had sidearms that they kept in their vehicles. And after this rally, we learned later, I talked to the police department there in Eagle Pass. There was at least one arrest related to this convoy. There was somebody who was on private property, and apparently they had a warrant from Bexar County that was outstanding. So they took them in on that warrant. But at least one arrest was related to it. But more importantly, there was just news out about this plot by 3 armed militiamen that was recently foiled, who were planning to come to the border and specifically to execute Border Patrol and federal agents and migrants. So the last person in that was arrested on Monday, or this previous Monday. So when I talk about this, literally Abbott is putting a crosshair on this community. That is what I mean. These are very concrete, real, specific examples of people with violent intent, far-right folks with violent intent coming into this community who are armed and are ready and willing to do this kind of violence. So I think this community is caught in between not only this battle between the federal and state government, but also just in the political rhetoric between Democrats and Republicans. They have no idea who to trust. And yeah, that's the position they've basically been put in.
I want to get back to that, but I have a question that's like political or jurisdictional. I've had people ask me this, and I'm not sure I'm answering it well. But what's the kind of relationship between the various groups there, like the National Guard, the Border Patrol? Is ICE there? Local cops? Howard? Because I get the sense there's not a great deal of cooperation there as well.
Yeah, so there's Border Patrol and there's Texas National Guard. There are obviously
now Border Patrol's federal, so
yeah, Border Patrol's
the
federal.
National Guard. Abbott is deployed, but it's actually federal too, if Biden wanted to. So
right.
Is that?
So Border Patrol is the largest law enforcement agency in the country on measurable metrics. So anytime you're driving into the border, you will hit a checkpoint, at least on your way out, coming out. You'll see it coming in. They don't stop you coming in, but you have to go through the checkpoint coming out. But yeah, you'll regularly see, once you're about 2 hours or so out, you start to see Border Patrol vehicles everywhere. In all the gas stations you stop at, there's usually a Border Patrol like vehicle there at some point. So you start to see them all over. The ACLU calls 100 miles from the border the Constitution-free zones in the United States.
And
so
anybody who's gone through customs.
But yeah, as far as I know, even the Border Patrol Union backed the most recent Senate bill that was recently scuttled by
I was going to ask you that. Okay.
Yeah, so they backed that, which is why the folks on the left were signaling, hey, this isn't a good deal.
Yeah.
But the folks on the left and folks on the right weren't happy with the bill, but for obviously very different reasons. But a major reason why it was scuttled is because Trump wants to run on immigration. He doesn't want to immigration. He wants to run on that. And there's that. But one of the things that America Garcia brings up is she talks about how that bill, it would have shut down the international crossings once they hit 5,000 migrant encounters or encounters with asylum seekers. And what she talks about is that would actually really hurt the economy of Eagle Pass, because a lot of the economy is predicated on people who are crossing legally and doing trade as part of, their jobs. And they even want to build another crossing. one of the things the community is asking assistance for is to get this third crossing there up and running. And yeah, basically, yeah, there are these parties. I think that there are a lot of people in the Guard, just folks I've known around in my life, who get frustrated with having to get sent there, like people in the Guard saying that this is a waste of resources. I can't say who or what that connection is, but just something I've heard from folks in my life who have military connections talking about having to go there. It's a huge, they get pulled off their regular missions and then they have to go and get deployed over here for who knows how long. It's just a huge disruption to their life. And it's something that they feel like is totally superfluous with the amount of resources that we already put into Border Patrol on the federal level. Again, it's the largest law enforcement agency. For a lot of folks in the Guard, I don't know why I have to do this mission. It's a huge disruption to my life. A lot of folks don't get it.
Back on the convoy, within these right-wing media networks or social media networks, and probably also on right-wing media, I don't follow it that closely, at one point they were talking about this as going to be the next January 6th. The organizers said there was going to be something like 700,000 people who were going to join the convoy and go to Eagle Pass. But it turned out to be, especially it paled in comparison to that. And I'm just wondering if I read maybe there were like 50 vehicles that were part of it. Which sounds to me like a couple hundred people at best. And I'm just curious where we definitely have, like you said, dangerous people who are, participating in this, but also it seems like it's just they're not that good of organizers. As an organizer, I like to say that about right wingers, or it's just not as much of a buzz as they had hoped.
So a part of that is, and I'm sure folks will love this, but the right really loves to shoot their own foot when it comes to stuff they're doing, because they're always going to be, I think as far as they try to organize things like this, there's always going to be a heavy segment of folks on the right who are like, this is a psyop, this could be a false flag, don't fall for this is a honeypot. Lots of that. In looking at the Telegram channel, there's just very elevated levels of paranoia about how this could be the new J6. So I think that is definitely a factor in depressing turnout. It's just they do this to themselves. But also, no, these folks aren't great organizers. This convoy was plagued by a number of problems as it made its way through Texas. But one interesting thing that happened is some tires got slashed. So that's a fun tidbit.
You mean the convoy's tires?
Yeah, the convoys, some of the vehicles in the convoy tires got slashed, but
I would never approve of that, Scott. We would never.
I'm anti-sabotage as anti-sabotage as it gets.
It would be horrible if more tires got slashed, wouldn't it?
Awful. But they also had like turnarounds. They got lost. They had arguments. So
it sounds like Rudy Giuliani was directing the thing.
Exactly. So as far as I know, they had a rally in Dripping Springs, which is about an hour away from here in Austin, at a brewery, and about 50 cars pulled in there. But really the main event of this thing was this rally that they did not in Eagle Pass, but in Quemado, Texas, which is about 20 minutes away from Eagle Pass. And they did pick up members and speed as they rolled into Quemado. But I was in Eagle Pass on Friday and I was waiting for them to arrive. They indicated that they were going to arrive there at around noon. Like they were supposed to leave from Dripping Springs that morning, like 9 a.m. It's about a 3 or 4 hour drive from Dripping Springs, and be there around noon. They did not show up until 8 o'clock at night. They were nearly 8 hours late. So I had been waiting around there seeing if they were going to show up. And I decided to just give up for that night because I had to get back home. Anyway, yeah, they were extremely late in when they were supposed to get there, but they did have their rally on Saturday. But yeah, another thing that you really pick up on is it's in addition to the paranoia stuff, and you can look at these specific links that I pointed out to like specific militias and specific sort of like white supremacists, like Ryan Sanchez is this white supremacist who helped organize that 2022 convoy to DC following the Canadian trucker convoy. He's somewhat involved in this. There are these specific links there. But if you look at these Telegram chats, there is a lot of talk about replacement theory racial replacement and language around the quote unquote necessity of white racial consciousness and really egregious, harrowing stuff. They're dropping the N-word in these chats. Whoever these organizers are just have no control over these chats and who's getting in there. You know what I mean? It's just, you can find this on just the main Telegram chat and some of these sub threads going on. And there's just absolutely no control, and they have the worst elements in there. But I think it really goes to show how this idea of replacement theory, this conspiracy theory, is driving so much and is the main. We don't like to necessarily, a lot of the media doesn't like to connect those dots, but it is one of the hugest driving factors behind even the mainstream political rhetoric you're seeing from Abbott right now. And that goes up to Trump. And that's why I brought up the poisoning the blood comment, because he specifically made that comment in regard to immigration. And the rhetoric is getting more heated. And a lot of that has to do with this simmering stuff behind the scenes about the right's obsession increasingly with this idea of replacement theory. And I think it's just really important to hammer that home. We've seen the results of that in El Paso with the shooting and the violence that comes from that. Yeah, I don't think it will be too long until we see some kind of violent incident on the border, either directed against migrants or potentially even federal agents, or I don't know. But it seems like if this rhetoric goes unchecked much longer, we will see bloodshed this way. I mean, in addition to the bloodshed we already see, right, with the deaths of migrants coming every day. So
I don't know if you saw it, but there was an article today in Newsweek online about this, which is very similar to what you wrote a couple of weeks ago. It's getting out there. What are the people in Eagle Pass? It's not a huge group yet, and I'm assuming Jesse Fuentes is like the spokesperson for this group, or I seem to. What are like? Do they have any kind of specific plans or programs, or what are they trying to do? I mean, obviously, you want to kind of get the attention. This is a tough battle. Do they have any kind of larger kind of program or?
Yeah, they want their park back. Like, this is not a federal park. It's not even a state park. It's a municipal park. This is their park. Their park, this is like their park where they had quinceañeras and like 4th of July cookouts and stuff like that. And this park is now gated off, and like the National Guard controls it and Border Patrol controls it. And they just like, this is the town and this is their park, and they just don't have it anymore. So it's really wild, because when I was there on Sunday, and the governor, he comes in with the 14 governors, and I'm with the residents and the locals who live there, and we're all locked out. We can't get, that's the governors and everybody else and all the press, they're all like filing into the park. And we're like, I'm over here with the people who live here, and they're just like totally locked out. And it's just wild, that whole dynamic. So they are asking for their park back. And so that's their main campaign. But the other thing that they're really underscoring is that to go back to the racial replacement stuff, is that there's also those historical links there directly to the Civil War and the Confederacy. So that park, Shelby Park, is named for General Shelby. This was a Confederate general who, there's this incident where he is fleeing Union soldiers, and he, instead of surrendering his Confederate battle flag, he goes and he crosses the Rio Grande and he sinks it in the waters of the Rio Grande instead of surrendering the flag. And for a while in their city council in Eagle Pass, in the main lobby, they had this painting of this incident depicting General Shelby sinking the flag. And that actually, I went to look for it to see if it was still up when I was there, and I couldn't find it. So I think somebody had the sense to take it down finally. But so basically, Abbott is coming around again full circle and using some of the rhetoric that led to that incident, to that conflict, that Civil War conflict. He is reigniting the same tensions with his rhetoric, which the subtext of it is this racial replacement stuff, but it is going full circle. And what they want is they want to rename that park. They not only want it back, but they want to rename it. They don't want it to be called Shelby Park anymore. And I think they're still working through exactly what it would be called. America Garcia wants it to be named for her father, who has been an active community member. His name's Mike Garcia. They want to call it the Mike Garcia Friendship Park, or some kind of name that would connotate friendship and their connection with Mexico. I think they really want to highlight and lift that up. But that's really the central campaign. It's just, we want our park back, we want to rename it, and we want to chart a path forward to a future That doesn't look like we're going to have another civil war. That doesn't look like as the bleak future that we seem to be heading into right now. And one thing that America Garcia Grewal has been really great about lifting up is climate change. Unprompted, I didn't ask her about this, but she starts to talk about it. And she makes these connections between climate change and migration, where she's talking about if we really want to do this energy transition and we really want to adapt to climate change, like we need to be letting folks in and training folks. A lot of these people, if they're not seeking asylum, they're coming for economic reasons, and they would love to be trained to do jobs that would help bolster an energy transition or something like that. Or if not that, some other useful thing in building up the care economy or whatever, just in the directions that we need to head if we are going to try to survive what's coming. And so I think these folks definitely have, good heads on their shoulders. They're in a really tough spot. They're just getting on their feet, but that seems to be the central ask.
One question, one thing I've been actually thinking about a bit with this is these 14 governors came. We've also seen National Guard units deploy from other states. Abbott, and I know DeSantis has done this. I'm sure other red state governors have done this as well. They put undocumented people on buses and send them to the woke blue states. That's happened actually in Sacramento, which is actually pretty close to me lots of times. What is Abbott's end game? He seems to be constantly like trying to challenge the federal government. These other governors are buying in on that as well.
Along with that, I think yesterday, Texas has already spent in excess of $100 million. I think it's $130 million, sending people out to these other cities. So it's become an issue here as well, just the immense cost of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in terms of his end game, I think it's really and I think he's starting to be successful is what's scary, but he's really amping up the political rhetoric and changing the politics to make this an issue that is like anathema for like Democrats to approach. And I do think he is seeking some kind of change and federal policy that would make the draconian things that the state of Texas wants for the border to become more of a reality. So one of his quotes was talking about how we're doing everything but shooting people at the border. You see this quote, that's not word for word, but it's something along the lines of we're doing literally everything we can but shooting migrants. And that's pretty much what he wants policy-wise. He wants a lot of the things that were in the scuttled Senate bill, he would like to see, right? He would like to shut the border crossings down if it hits 5,000 people. He would like the asylum system to be much harsher, and they want to make the current systems that they want to get it as close to just being able to just completely deport people and get people out and not let people cross at all. That's what they want. They want to shut the border down completely. And so I think that by raising and amping the political rhetoric this way, they're getting closer and closer to achieving that on the federal level. And they had a lot of problems with the way that bill came out, but you can see a scenario where if Trump wins re-election and Republicans take control of the House, they would absolutely pass a bill that is so much more harsh and draconian than even what we saw in that sort of compromise bill that was scuttled. And I think that is really the goal. Yeah, that's what I would say.
This is a big question because you understand this issue really well. What the Democrats have punted, obviously, right? They attacked Trump and then did either what Trump did or did nothing. What's the way out of this right now? It just seems that politically this issue has become so toxic. There's no resistance from the Democratic Party or from really most folks, people on the ground. What do the people in Eagle Pass have any sense of optimism, or is there any real idea of what can be done given the nature of this political system and the election year, and both candidates are addled and running further to the right? Is there any, you've been following this, is there anybody who's come up with kind of a reasonable idea how to address this? Because the White House certainly hasn't.
Yeah, I think if you had strong progressives out there who are really running on the opposite message and really just leaning harshly into it as hard as they can, I think it takes some explaining. I think not enough of the public understands the push factors that are driving folks to come. And they have views of migrants that are prejudiced or just really outdated about whether or not they pay taxes or these things like that. And a lot of that information needs to be like corrected and updated, but I don't see progressives I see them backing away from this issue and not leaning into it. I think that there is an appetite for a message that is, hey, one thing is that the story I wrote ended up doing really well. And that's because it had a banner. The headline that was blaring is, "This invasion is not from migrants. It is from the right. This invasion is coming from the right." And a lot of people are really receptive to that message. That's not necessarily even my message. That's what the people who live there are saying. But I think if you have progressives who are up there taking that message and bringing it right, like, where is the war? Who's bringing this war, this armed invasion? Because I don't see it coming from the migrants. I see it coming from these far right folks over here and from these governments over here. That's who's bringing the armed invasion. Let's drill down on what these words mean, and let's drill down on why these people are coming, because they're not coming to invade. They just want to live, like, I hate this saying, but they want more or less the American dream. I realize that's problematic in a lot of ways, or people can dissect that however they want, but that's essentially, everybody just wants to live like a good life. You know what I mean? They want their children to have access to schools, and that's what the residents of Eagle Pass are asking for too. Folks just want to be able to live a good life and have the resources they need to survive. That's all anybody ever wants. That's what the residents of Eagle Pass want. That's what the migrants want. And I would say folks on the far right probably want that too. So we just need folks who are willing to carry that message. And if we all work together, we can figure out the solutions, right? We can give people the resources to live a good life and achieve the quote unquote American dream by leaning into the energy transition and welcoming migrants into the new care economy that we want to build. We have to build these new economies, and we should welcome everybody who wants to participate in that. And we can figure this out. But it seems like progressives are running away from that, more and more fearful, and more basically leaning into this rhetoric around, what does this mean? That migrants are a threat, to our jobs, because jobs are like scarce. But if we build these new economies, if we do like essentially a Green New Deal, but bigger, like, the jobs won't be as scarce. Yeah, we just don't have folks connecting those dots.
One of the selling points of NAFTA and other supranational agreements like CAFTA or FTA was actually labor mobility. That was one of the selling points of it back in the 90s. And now and in this whole period, I've never seen anybody defend the system. The system is a defensible way it's being, organized and processed, but still, Julian Castro has said a few things I've seen mushy in my mind, at least. But yeah, it's a scary situation, because it's hard in an election year, especially with these two, Mezzo Morto running, to see anybody taking any kind of positive or affirmative steps in this right now. It's just, right now, I think that everybody's running to bash immigrants even more. It's a scary situation.
That's a little bit of I had one last question. First, I want to say thanks for the tip on the clicks on the title. We may play that into this title. But I remember a couple of weeks ago during the New Hampshire primary, when they were polling Republican voters, what was the number one issue for them? In New Hampshire, it was the crisis on the border. And I don't think they were talking about the Canadian-New Hampshire
border, yeah.
Right? And it just, I find it's dispiriting to find that even progressives are backing off on this. And I haven't actually even really seen where the squad or anyone like that, maybe I'm wrong, I haven't seen a lot of also Gaza and Palestine, or like what dominates a lot of my news feed, but I haven't seen a lot of progressive politicians speaking out about this. They do on the right, but I don't really see it especially the progressive left, even nationally.
Yeah, I haven't seen too much. I could just be missing some stuff and some headlines. Maybe there has been, but it hasn't really been super apparent on my feed, at least. And it seems like it's just a gone silent thing.
But when Trump was locking up children on the border and ICE facilities, AOC took a break from her first campaign to go down there to one of the detention centers to join a protest.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not great. Yeah, I would love to see more forceful rhetoric about this. And the folks in Eagle Pass are a great resource. Progressives, I don't know, Greg Casar should go down there and do a press conference with America Garcia and Jesse Foote. Like, that would be a good media event if or not him, but he's closest. But if one of these squad members wanted to come and do that, it would be a great press event. And I think that they could really gin up a lot of they could get a different narrative going. So for sure, it's just, we're not seeing a lot of, we're just not seeing that. It seems like they're instead, they're just like letting they're staying silent on this issue.
You got any other questions, Bob?
No, it's great talking to you, although the topics we discuss are generally not all that appealing. But thanks for all this. And it's something we'll keep an eye on. But as Scott said, right now, especially with Gaza going, it's hard to get any kind of dialogue on this at all. You bring it up to people, and even I'm not really no different. I'm following the Middle East and other areas, kind of stuff. This just gets a little sliver of attention. And so when I get an article like yours, it's really helpful. But there's so much of the media which has just punted and gone along with everybody else on this. And now, one last thing, aren't a lot of these mayors in these Democratic cities that are having the people bust there, they're complaining, like Adams in New York, who's horrible anyway, but it seems I've seen like other reports where a lot of these cities are saying, we don't want any more of these people telling Biden you got to do something, which basically implies that there's a crackdown there too.
Yeah, that just goes back to, again, resources don't have to be so scarce, right? Like, why these cities are, it's an issue of they don't have enough resources to adequately handle the influx that's coming in. But that can change that. We can always change that. We should just basically focus on the domestic issues that people are asking politicians to focus on, care and education and all of these civil services that we need. Yeah, if we had listened to the demands of activists, what is it, almost 10 years ago, more, for a long time, right? Continuation.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, it's the same demands. It's just, I don't know how many different ways or who has to say them to make them work, but
Well,
yeah.
Adams last year in New York, I think, spent what, $7 billion or some insane amount on police, and I forget how much of that was overtime. You take a portion of that and you've resolved a lot of your problems elsewhere.
Right. And going back to that, in terms of how they pour money, the Democrats, instead of pouring the money into the resources that people want and are asking for, the people who vote for them and are often their base, instead pour them into policing and surveillance. One of the things that Biden has been doing, even when he was using that rhetoric in 2020 around not another foot, talking about the wall, he's continued to invest heavily in new technologies to create a smart wall. There are a lot of up and coming border like technologies, these autonomous surveillance towers on the border that are able to sense your heat signature and movement hundreds of miles away and send signals. And there are all sorts of really wild technologies that are up and coming. And that seems to be really what a lot of Democrats like are willing to fund and invest in, is they would rather do, instead of building a physical wall, they just want to build a smart wall instead.
That reminds me of the memes with the two bombers. One's a Republican just bombing, the other one's a Democrat, but it's got like the rainbow flag and BLM on it. Yeah, that's what we're seeing here. Yeah. Kinder, gentler machine gun here.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's been great talking to you as always. Folks, we've been talking with Candice Bernd, the editor and senior editor and staff reporter at Truthout. You should definitely check out her new article in Truthout, which is Locals Say Eagle Pass is Being Invaded by Christian Nationalists, Not Migrants. And we'll include it in the show notes. And if you like what you're hearing, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe. If you're listening to us on the audio platforms, give us a rate and review. It helps us with the algorithms. If you really like us, check us out at greenandredpodcast.org and hit the support button, or become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. Candice, it's been great talking with you again today, and I'm sure we'll talk to you again sometime soon. And everyone else out there, make trouble and misbehave.